What's the most corrupt thing you've witnessed your employer do? Growing up, my father always told me to save my pay stubs and time receipts. I ended up working a job in my early 20s at an airport moving cars. I get my paycheck one day and I realize that it's not right, so I do a little digging, and a lot of math, and I figure out that the company was taking hours from me. I ask around and it turns out that they were taking hours from literally everyone at the job site. After doing more math, we figured out that over the 6 months we all worked together, the company had stolen a combined 400 hours from 8 people. My coworkers always forging the signs on the financial reports, the document for the upper-ups. The admins know, the bosses know. If there are new projects, definitely there will be some percents cut for tax, and that tax went into those people's private pockets. They said that it's how things are. Work in a university funded by government, in a corrupted country. My naive and fresh from university ass really am afraid. My idealism is not ready for this kind of reality. Not as bad as some others in this thread, but it still really pissed me off. I worked for a very large telecom company. They would do things around election time like ask for donations to the super PAC that they were a part of for the good of the company, or send a recommended list of people, topics that we should vote for in the elections, in so many words. But what really got me pissed off was when net neutrality was becoming a huge topic. They sent everyone an email explicitly stating that they were in favor of net neutrality and that we had nothing to worry about if we heard the company name mentioned on the news or in court when it came to that topic, and that they were on the side of the consumer and being free to visit the sites you wanted to visit with no catch. Of course that was a lie, because when numbers came out for what companies were lobbying and spending how much money for what side of the argument, they were one of the top contributors against net neutrality. It's one thing to be a greedy corporation and not tell your employees how you're being greedy and underhanded. It's a completely different level to straight up lie to their faces about it in a company-wide email. My company informed me that they operate a PAC that individuals were welcome to contribute to for lobbying in the interests of the company. I said, absolutely not. I work in the food and beverage industry, and the lady talking about the PAC was very proudly telling us how they have been lobbying against laws about minimum recycled content for packaging and laws banning small single-use shooters because they aren't recyclable. Had a job out of college selling Yellow Pages advertising. A big part of the job was just renewing the old ads in the book, and we had to call each business to have them renew their ad. But as the Yellow Pages book became more and more obsolete, more customers would cancel their ads. So the company changed the policy of having us call each business and instead put in a policy that any customer who didn't specifically call to cancel would be auto-renewed. Then they would purposefully send out the renewal notices late enough that the customers couldn't cancel in time to avoid the following year's charges. If one of us did actually get a call from a customer looking to cancel and with time to legitimately do so, and we actually canceled them, fired. Worked in a restaurant that didn't allow employees to work over 40 hours as they did not want to pay any overtime. Instead, of you wanted to work extra, or if they asked you to work extra, they would delete hours off of your time card to keep it under 40. They always asked you when they did that in a kind of hush-hush way, so it wasn't exactly without permission, but I think it was bullshit all the same. I was a mechanic that found out that the company was not letting me fix customers' cars that had oil leaks when the customers had paid for a 200k mile warranty. The manager would tell the service writer to say that the warranty company declined it, and eventually started making me take a photo to him so that he could tell me that the leak wasn't bad enough to fix. The customer paid for a warranty and the company wasn't holding up their end of the deal because it was costing them money. They are one of the most profitable car dealerships in my town and now have 3 dealerships and are expanding. I was working at a small brewery, bar, and caught the owner dipping into the tip jar at the end of big nights. It was a new place that just opened and was kind of struggling during the off-season. We literally had a staff of 2 bartenders and the owners, husband and wife, so the bar staff would pool and split that day's tips. Come to find out that he was taking a cut of the tips because he worked there too. When I confronted him, I explained that it's actually a violation of the FLSA. In fact, it's even an exact example listed as illegal things to do with tips. He argued that it was his right as owner and fired me, so I reported him to Department of Labor. The CEO was using company money to fund his lavish lifestyle. It went on for a long time because hey, there's a fine line between using a private jet because you need to travel to business meetings on time versus using it for your own personal enjoyment. All the employees knew about it, so it was no surprise when he was finally forced to step down by the shareholders once one of the larger ones complained about it publicly. When I used to housekeep at a hotel, our head housekeeper would go into all of our checkouts and steal our tips before we could get to them. I remember a few times seeing tips in my rooms and foolishly not thinking to pick them up before they disappeared. A few of my other coworkers witnessed similar instances. At one point, a guest came up to me and said she'd leave a big tip in her room for me BC it was a mess. I found out later that the head housekeeper cleaned the room herself. She walked out like a year later BC our GM demoted her to regular housekeeper BC everyone had complaints about her. She was a very awful person in general. As a housekeeping manager, I'd shed that supervisor on the spot without question. There's ways to set them up when you suspect. Time-stamped photos, security cameras, lock audits, etc. Mama don't fuck around with her employees' rights. I've done it before when tip theft was accused and either confirmed it or found it to be untrue. Either way, it's a serious issue that will wreck a team. I worked for a company that managed parking meters. They would hand out tickets if you didn't pay or exceeded your time on the parking meters. I worked in customer service. This meant answering calls and letters from people who wanted to contest their ticket. The problem was we could not help people who called in. We were advised to tell them they had to write a letter and that, only then, could we review their dispute. The second problem was, not once were we able to approve a dispute. Every single dispute was refused, no matter the circumstances. We would have older people call who went to a hospital for a procedure that lasted 10 minutes longer than expected, so they were issued a ticket. They would be on the phone crying that they were unable to pay for the ticket. Couldn't we have compassion? I do, but I wasn't allowed to show any. They would ask to speak to a manager and my manager absolutely refused to take any call. We were not allowed to send any calls to her. The corrupt part, at the time I was working there, it was illegal to issue tickets for parking meters by privately owned companies, which this was. The management team was constantly going to court to fight this, but it was still illegal. So, we had to tell every caller they had to pay their ticket, write in a worthless letter that would be rejected or pay a fine that was technically illegal, and of course couldn't say any of that. I've had a couple that tried to pressure you to work off the clock, without actually asking you to do so in order not to get sued. Suckered some people into doing it. If they complained after the fact they got canned, and by that I mean they got all hours cut until they were forced to quit so they couldn't file for unemployment. I just made it clear I wasn't playing their games in the first place. First time they tried me I was like, isn't that working off the clock? And they were like, oh no, of course not. We're not asking that at all. Just looking for volunteers. I can't volunteer. Do you want me to stay clocked in? Or go home since my shift is over? Oh well, I suppose you can go home. We'll figure it out. Needless to say, they did not like me much after that and made working there a living hell. Cut my hours to low numbers, but not altogether. But I had already asked my old boss if they'd take me back, which they welcomed me back with open arms. Only reason I took the new job was they paid like $3 an hour more. But ob's not worth it if I'm expected to work for free. I've been through several jobs where you're expected to pay your dues to earn a more desirable position. I've learned that the more they expect you to pay your dues at a crappy job, the less likely you are to have any upward mobility. If a company cares about investing in its employees, they usually start with decent base pay and benefits. Otherwise they're likely just looking for cheap disposable labor which they lure in with fake promises. One time when I was a chef in college, I worked 14 days straight, with half of those days being 12-hour days. This all fell in one pay period too. It was rough, but it was summer and I was gushing over the amount of overtime I was about to get. It came out to like over 70 hours overtime. I was supposed to get almost an additional $1,000 on my paycheck. I calculated the math with tax and everything and couldn't wait to pick up my paycheck the next week for that pay period. I pick it up, and the paycheck is quite larger than I'm used to, given I normally only work 25 hours a week, but there is zero overtime on it. It was short almost $1,000. I got to the HR office the next day. It was located at a different casino, and asked, and they go, yeah, so in Nevada, you only qualify for overtime if you average 40 hours a week normally. That sounded like bullshit to me, but I asked my mom, who used to run finances for our family business, and she says that is in fact 100% bullshit. She pulled up the statute online and it clearly said if you exceed 8 hours in a day, you get overtime. It said nothing about a weekly average. So printed that bitch out and drove right back down to the HR office, and showed it to them. The lady at the desk who just told me that like calls out the head of HR. She would frequent the different locations to check in with people and was always nice, but you could always tell she was shady as fuck. They both seemed to get very nervous and in a stuttering voice, okay, we will reevaluate. I never heard anything or got any apology, but when the next paycheck came, the exact amount of overtime I calculated was put on that paycheck down to the penny. I tell some of the other guys in the kitchen what happened, and apparently the family who owned the casino or restaurant was located and was known for pulling shit like this, making accounting errors, knowing a lot of people who do direct deposit don't even look at their pay stubs. Funny how these accounting errors always ended up in saving the company money, and never gave the employee extra cash. Lol. A server no more than a few months later had the same exact shit happen to him. Rat bastards. Man, I feel ya. My old job was 5 days on, 4 off, 5 on 5 off, then 4 on 5 off. Stupid to stay on top of pay, right? It gets better. They intentionally hold on to some of your money so to equalize your pay. Gets more great. I also get bonus per hour due to the nature of my job. The hourly rate is paid bi-weekly, and the bonus is semi-monthly. I have absolutely no fucking clue what I'm supposed to get paid and to stay on top of what's owed. I used to work at a place that was owned by an organization with some political affiliations. There was a rich Middle Eastern investor who owed my employer money, literally millions, from a contract that they simply never paid. It was quite a sensitive issue and one that everyone really wanted to keep out of court. Some negotiations took place and the investor agreed to pay, but in return, wanted a spot on the board. Everything was agreed. The guy would pay and then there would be a big party event, with some press, for his appointment to the board. At any rate, a few weeks before this was supposed to happen, the head of my organization became very ill and needed surgery and was gone for several weeks. The big party where the investor would become a member of the board had to be delayed. It turns out, our big boss wasn't actually sick at all and did not need to have surgery. Actually, what happened was, the head of the organization that owned my employer was running for political office and was worried about the optics of the whole event, only being able to get this rich Middle Eastern dude to pay us what he owed by putting him on the board and granting him a bunch of power over the organization, and basically ordered our boss to feign a long illness that would require the event to be delayed until after the election. At the first company I worked at, the general manager had all his personal expenses paid by the company. His wife also had a company credit card and was paid a salary, but she didn't work. The company paid for things like their groceries, house mortgage, car payments and family vacations. The kicker is he wasn't the owner of the company. He had a creative accountant that hid these expenses, but the owners became suspicious and they hired an auditor. It took them about 4 years to figure it out. He was fired and his family fled the country, so I'm not sure what happened to him. A few years ago I was living at a McDonald's in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. The area manager decided to save the store, so she became very involved in its day-to-day micromanagement. One payday morning she made an announcement that, because everyone kept coming in asking for their checks and bothering her, She would be giving them to us when she felt we deserved them. I called the local Department of Labor, who referred me to the state, who referred me back to local, who then told me they just didn't care and weren't looking into it. It eventually resolved itself anyway when she handed checks out the next day. I have another one that I remembered after seeing a comment. Not so much corrupted employer but employee. I worked for an insurance brokerage. There was a broker that was also on the town hall committee. Our brokerage handled their liability insurance, so when it came time to pay their insurance premiums, she took the check and deposited the money into her own bank account. So because of the type of insurance they had, it was something called broker billed, meaning the brokerage would pay for the premiums and it was our job to ensure we got the money and cancel policies if they were in arrears. This woman eventually got fired because she was very far behind on handling customers, and all of this came out in the Washington. Turns out, she stole a few $1,000s from the town committee. Keep in mind the community is only like a few hundred people, so yeah, small town drama. I think she ended up moving after. I work underground in the mines. One place started having, what the workers found out later, was asbestos-type rock in the ore. The company took samples of it and then said it's kind of like asbestos, but it's not old enough to harm you. Later, after a bit of more concern from the workers, it was found out that the sample they took came back as inconclusive due to something else. They lied and allowed the workforce exposure to asbestos. I quit after that and found work elsewhere. Cinema theaters used to force employees in the snack bar to work overtime until the cleaning was complete, but then would go back and retroactively change time cards so that everyone clocked out right at 11:15 for closing, as closing was only supposed to take 30 minutes after the last showtime starts at 10:45. I was a weekend closer for a few years, and occasionally would be there until 1 a.m. plus on really busy nights when management wanted things detailed. All of those hours went into the nether. They'd hide the fact that you weren't getting overtime by lying on your pay stub. They also used to fudge lunch breaks, saying that it was too busy to send employees on their lunch at a proper time, so you'd occasionally show up to work and go on lunch 15-30 minutes after arriving, or you'd go on lunch after 7.5 hours in your shift and just 10-30 minutes early, but with an expectation that you'd hang around for 30 minutes until your shift was over. I do my best to avoid their theaters, despite them being everywhere. During high school there was a movie theater in an affluent neighborhood that was a sought-after place to get a job. It had minimum wage band same this you just described. Prices were also hiked up, but the place was sparkly clean, and I guess the rich customers felt that it a high-class place to watch their movies. Had friends who worked there part-time. Their boss would have work overtime but fudge up the time so they wouldn't get caught. Being teenagers and students after all, my friends didn't mind because they got to take as much free food and sodas they wanted, because the theater had a policy of throwing away any food they couldn't sell. My friends would go home with pizza, hot dogs, hamburgers, gallons of soda and other theater foods. It did made me wonder how the place stayed afloat. I used to work in a sushi restaurant and I quickly noticed it was common for vegetables to fall on the floor. So usually I will pick them up and throw them away. One day, mid-shift, while cleaning the whole kitchen with specific chemicals, I found a cucumber on the floor dripping water and soap. I threw it to the garbage. The manager saw me and yelled at me, telling me to just wash it. I declined, explaining it has been showered with soap and chemicals to clean. He grabbed it from the garbage, peeled it and gave it to the sushi makers. I was baffled. I quit and always told people to not eat there ever. This year one passed grade 10, which in Nepal is known as an Iron Gate. Very important, but due to the coronavirus exam got cancelled and the government decided to evaluate us by internal evaluation, basically by teachers giving marks to students according to the past performance. I was the best performing student in the school in the terminal and extracurricular activities. Well, I got a 3.9 GPA out of 4. I was satisfied because I used to get the same GPA in real physical exams. But my friends who failed in previous exams also got marks in the range of 3.80 to 3.90, with the lowest being 3.60. Then I learned that the school was selling marks for Rs $15,150. The school had asked my parents for money, but my parents, being confident of me, they denied the offer. I am proud of them, but now my marks are also regarded as corrupt by colleges, and it's getting harder to find colleges. TLDR equals school wanted money for marks added equals it's not directly related, but somehow it relates.